Hi, yeah. Don't know why it's all fuzzy. Hold on. There you go. Hopefully that's better. Hey, yeah. Wow. Eager beans. I love it. Look at you guys roll. Wow. This is at first. This is cool. Look at that. More on time than we are.
Good evening, all, or good morning, depending where you are.
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Cool. What's our first question? We have Cam and Nikki, the Loop crew. What would be an example consortium of plants to support citrus, orange, lemon, and mandarin? Would winter or summer fruiting citrus change this mix?
Right. Now, citrus, like a lot of fruits, they actually can need a impulse of sunlight in order to induce a good flowering rather than the fruit sweetening, as some people think. So that is more important. As a companion for you guys up there in Kawakawa, a good mix with citrus that Ernst recommended was figs, and they seem to be good companions. And also we have therefore a mix of evergreen and deciduous. So that is something to always keep in mind, because the evergreen trees, they need to soak up that extra sunlight that comes in winter for us, when the deciduous trees don't need the sunlight and let it through. So that mix is really important. And then within having a mix of evergreen and deciduous, which of those do best together? So within the row, citrus, fig, there will be the same strata, more or less, medium high strata. Actually, high strata would be probably the most beneficial for both of them. So then it means you still have room for an emergent to that, and that could be, again, ideally alternating evergreen and deciduous. So if your spot is a bit drier and you want a poplar, a Lombardini poplar, the ones that grow straight like a candle and handle more drought, or it could be another deciduous emergent, such as honey locust or raisin tree, alternating with a evergreen emergent in a subtropical setting, for instance, an Inga bean or a eucalypt. Sorry, just choked on some. Thank you, Frida.
Help the voice a bit.
So then you're still left with the lower strata. Think of some grass that does well in winter with the more incoming sunlight. Coxwood obviously is a good choice for that, and the other herbally, comfrey or whatever the humidity allows. And then remember, if you do rows like that and you go more commercial, then it makes sense to have one row, say, with medium emergent, and then another row with low and high, to break that up a bit, so that you don't have to always put in the same row low, medium, high, and emergent. That can get a bit messy. And in a commercial oriented food forest, you might break it up into a 2-row system, where one row only has 2 strata, jumping one, and the other offset, like that. Just to facilitate in the management, maintaining the gap between the canopies, and to more efficiently use the space to get it all in without cramming them in and make harvest easier. And in between, you have narrow pathways for harvest access.
Awesome.
But
and how
just
that
to
changed.
the winter summer fruiting citrus, I wouldn't worry about that. I mean, not on your scale. If that's something that you totally focus on as a commercial production, it's citrus and whatever goes with it, then you might look at those nuances. But for your situation, which is not that commercial, I wouldn't worry about these details.
Well, in some ways it can help if you've got a bit more of a dense consortium of food forest around you, that you select varieties that ripen in summer so that they have more light to be able to actually ripen fruit. Because if you've got that density in winter and then the ripening at that time, even with your emergent, because they are more even high emergent in winter to actually ripen as fruit, like sweet fruit.
Yeah.
So in some ways, selecting for summer fruiting, or if they're winter fruiting, then really opening it up when they're fruiting so that they can get that sun, because that's how they get sweet. So even though the plants survive in the shade quite well, for the sweetness of the fruit to come out, they do need that sun when they're fruiting.
Yeah. And then maybe another thing to keep in mind for that is that you could say, okay, if your main production layer is the high layer, such as or medium high layer, like for citrus and figs, for instance, okay, that's your production. And then the emergent layer, you could say, well, let's not have anything productive in there. These are just emergent trees for the pruning, like what we did in our temperate syntropic orchard, where all the emergent are pretty much just for mulching. We are not expecting anything of the poplars really. So they're then just for pruning. And then you can prune, okay, here you have some citrus that need light right now. Then we prune the emergent here at that moment. And others that might not need the light right now because they have a different season fruiting or flowering, we don't need to prune the emergent layer. So you could have blocks of that as well.
And then our next question is Alan here. Just wondering what seasonal things you guys are doing this month. There was a couple of monthly update vids at the start of the Patreon vids. I found them pretty helpful. Oh, awesome that you did. We weren't getting much feedback on that, so we thought maybe we would ease up on that. But that's cool that you found those helpful and hopeful maybe. Seasonal update for this season has been a lot of focus in the market garden for Maddie, planting a lot of seedlings for winter and whatnot. And regarding the food forest, we've been trying to focus on doing a lot of riparian management. So we've been really before we really get the rain coming down in winter, we don't want to have all that exposed when we have the main rains. So we do the chop and drop now, just so it has enough time for that autumn sun to come in, hit the ground layer, and come up with another rejuvenation of vegetation. But before the seasonal rains come in winter, and it can be all closed up again, and so we don't have more runoff than we intend to. So that's been our main focus at the moment. We've recently got our intern arrived 2 weeks ago, so that's been the mission with him, and just general food foresting as well, trying to do chopping and dropping in this autumn period. So again, we're increasing that sunlight down to our lower areas, but in time for it to close up again for any winter frost that we might have. So we did a big intervention down in the temperate food forest in the squares as well, cutting back all the comfrey, and we didn't do the Jerusalem artichokes because they're still producing really well, and we want them to capture as much sunlight to increase their tubers. So we did a light management of just generally the underground and a few of the more emergent crops. The poplars in there we won't do until winter, so we didn't do them. Yeah, so just generally using autumn as as an opportunity to bridge the gap between summer and winter by increasing the light onto the ground, and it's not as harsh anymore, the sunlight, so we can really do a bigger, more drastic chop and drop, and also before the heavy rains come and all that. So that's been the main mission.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, since we have now Felix, our intern here, he has a very good theoretical knowledge on syntropy. He has been following us on Patreon for almost as long as we do that now. And now he needs to learn how to use the machete and recognize plants in the field. He quite impressed me with a plant ID app that he has on his phone, so he can just go, oh yeah, this is that and that and that, and that's where the plant comes from and how you use it and so on. And I feel like, whoa! And I spent decades getting that knowledge myself. But now the management of the plants and recognizing them in a fraction of a moment, that will take time, of course, using a machete. And so at the moment, we try to we start with food forests in areas where there are not too many little seedlings that are hard to recognize on the floor and so on. So we started with the riparian strip you might have seen on Instagram. Frida put a clip on that. There was an easy one. It was hard. It was really dense and looked very messy because of the giant reed that we actually purposefully planted in there. But it's an amazing biomass, and we moved all that material out, either compost or feeding goats or growing mushrooms from it. And so every week we will go more into more sophisticated forms of food forest, and we have to speed the process up now. Alan, you asked recently, when is the time to really go into opening up the canopies? And it is now. We are now equinox, and that is a real wake-up call that we need to get our canopies opened up to adjust from having too much sun to having not enough sun. That transition is going on very fast now. And by the way, you see I have a bandage here, and you have seen maybe the video on the machete work the other day. No, it's not from a machete. It was just something silly like pulling hard on a blanket or something ridiculous. So I did my thumb in a bit. Nothing serious, no flesh wound.
And next question from Aaron and Emma. In your last video, you talk about feeding seaweed and biochar to your stock. How do you get them? How do you get it into them? With treats.
We tie their feet up, put them on their back. No, they're actually really keen on it. They're really keen on the seaweed. Of course, not the biochar, but we do feed them a bit of treats occasionally when we milk them. I mean, yeah, when we milk them, we give them a bit of treat, and we try to keep it perennial. So we use copra as the only thing that we don't produce really, and mix it with seaweed and the charcoal in there. Is there anything else I forgot?
Seaweed, charcoal.
Sometimes we chip sugar cane for them, or if we don't have enough of anything, they actually really like to have a few leaves of mahoy. Yeah, that is actually really good treat for them. And so if you wet the seaweed and the charcoal, even just with mahoy leaves, if you don't want to buy anything, they eat that then.
And also another thing that's quite worth adding is different sort of pasture seeds that you might want to establish in your pastures, be that plantain or treefoot trifoil. What's it? Treefoot trifoil?
Birdfoot trifoil.
Birdfoot trifoil,
Yeah.
which is a nitrogen fixer. Clover, anything like that. If you actually feed it to them and then they poop it out in their manure across the paddock, then they have much more likely to germinate and actually thrive in that location than just sort of spreading it out your paddocks.
Yeah.
So that's a nice way of using them to sort of seed your pastures with more of a diversity of foliage. But yeah.
Yeah, but the seaweed you could get from the beach, and if it doesn't have too much sand or something, you have to watch out there's no nylon line in it or anything like that. You can feed it like so. And especially if you don't give them salt, then they try to source salt from the seaweed and eat it more eagerly. Just the other day we had a problem with our horse. She got a colic. We had been feeding seaweed for weeks, but maybe there was too much sand on it, I think, on that day. So there was some trouble. Maybe, we don't know, but maybe horses, you have to be a bit more careful with what might be in the seaweed. Also, they're quite careful eaters, but you never know. But yeah, otherwise just so. But then we do grind it up, clean seaweed that we find, or even wash in the sea still, and then we put it on rocks, we dry it, and then cut the stalks off because they're really hard to put through a shredder, and then just through a garden shredder, and it makes a pretty fine chips of seaweed. It works really well. We might do actually video and stuff like that still. Yeah.
And molasses also, just as a note, is good to get things down them as well, just mixing it up with a bit of molasses. And then Rachel, you're asking, what's the setup cost approximately for a 200 square meter property? Cheers. Just before we get into that, because you'll probably hear us say it depends, maybe a bit of context. So property in terms of you're wanting a food forest, there's just a lot of dependence on it.
I would assume. So that's, hey Oliver, great to hear from you.
Okay,
Oliver was a student some like 12, 14 years here for North Tech here, and now he's living in West Australia and he has his property there. So welcome to our program, Oliver, and thanks for supporting us. And it really depends on, you could do everything on a shoestring, totally, but then you might take more time, right? You could also go the other extreme and go and get grafted plants and everything already in PB 5, 10, whatever. Then it gets expensive. But if you want shoestring, you could do everything from stakes, like elephant grass, sugarcane from stakes, scavenge for banana suckers and so on. And then everything direct seeded and then in situ grafted. So you could do the whole thing by scavenging and not paying anything for it if you want to go there. So it's your choice, really. It can be anything. And sometimes that shoestring version, it might take a bit longer, but you might find by doing it so, the in situ grafting, the direct seeding of everything you could think of, and unless it's of course planting material of things that don't make seeds, such as sugarcane and elephant grass and a lot, that actually would be the better way to do it as well, because that's how it happens in nature, direct seeding. But then the question would be amendments. How poor is your soil? Getting everything through an accumulation system until you hit abundance can take different times, depending on how you do it and how bad your soil is to start with. How abused is it? How leached out? How weathered? How old? How acidic? And so on and so on. And for 2,000 square meter property, you probably want to fast track that. If it's a huge area, then you might more likely say, okay, let's take it slow and easy, and maybe even use animals for the grass management and just establish the food forest in rows and so on. On a big scale, you might want to go there, but on a small scale like that, you probably try to be somewhere in between. Now, how much would that cost? Well, per square meter, we calculate something like 5 woody plants. If you buy them in a nursery, these plants would all be between, say, $2-3, and if it's a grafted tree, say $40. So that's it, and then so many seeds still. So you can sort of calculate on that.
The 200 square meter food forest that I planted in Camel on volcanic soil. So we did spend a little bit on amendments, but not too much. But because it was a community project, we did go in with a lot of already grafted plants and bigger trees and stuff, just to, show that there's something that went in. And that came to around 5,000 not including, labor or anything. It was all community stuff. So yeah, that's sort of like a ballpark for doing something to the density that you ideally want and getting everything, all ready to have something to show for. So that's sort of on the other end. And then obviously we could have definitely lowered that price a lot if we had wanted to do more direct sowing and scavenging and whatnot.
And then the amendments, depends on your soil, but usually they're fairly cheap. Is it lime? It's cheap. Is it? Do you have to buy a lot of compost to fast track things? As you guys know, who are on for longer already, the ideal way to start a syntropic food forest is treating it like a garden bed. You install a garden bed, you put everything in that you would put in a garden bed, be that compost, manure, or gypsum, or whatever you think a garden bed needs at that moment, you put in. But the difference is only once and never again. So you do the digging, ideally, if you want to fast track it, you do the digging or rotary hoeing and put all the amendments in that you think that site needs to get to its optimum, the missing ingredients. And that varies from site to site what that cost will add up to. But the thing is, you only do it once. After that, it runs on its own return. From there on, it's the sunlight that will fertilize the place once you have those basics in there. Hang on, there was a question about tools.
Yep.
Helen.
Yep. So then Helen, you ask, would love to know all of the tools I should start collecting for when our food forest goes, and buying things now as we are noticing a lot of supply shortages. Nice.
There was a question recently about use of tools and so on. So we should make a video about that, maybe tool maintenance. We were planning on that soon anyway.
Yeah, there is, for now, there is a video that I put out on, I believe it was food forest, managing a young food forest.
Right.
It was, I think, just last month, where I showed the different tools that we were using at that stage, from machete, sickles, and secateurs and handsaws and whatnot, just the core basics. Maybe check that out. But otherwise, we should do one specifically. There is a electric tool video as well, if you look that one up. But we should maybe go on one that's more specifically just for the food forest, hand tools or something, or whatnot. But I think you actually go through on all the tools on that one as well.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah, we might maybe if there's a question that Klaus is answering, I'll have a little quick search and see if I can find the names and the links of those videos, and then I'll put them in the comments here, or in the write-up of the live Q&A.
Yeah, but you're right. Investing in tools is always a good thing, especially when you're starting out. Get good tools right away. Otherwise, you buy two tools.
Cool. And Jill, awesome. So I've got your question on the comments, but I see you here, so that's awesome. So you have a eucalyptus that I planted in a tree row last spring. They're about 1 meter high now. Should I prune them a little when I do the autumn cutback of the other plants in the tree row? I'd say at about 1 meter, 1 year old, you wouldn't want to do too much of a drastic cut, because you really want them to pump upwards. But I don't know what yours look like, but from my experience, when they're young like that, they can start having like some side shoots coming off the bottom, or having quite heavy branching at the top, or maybe lots of branches further down the trunk. So doing a prune where you're just crown lifting them, so taking all the bottom little, even if they're just little stems, taking those all off, because they'll grow into proper branches, and you want to keep them as straight as possible, because then you might actually use them for timber later. And also you want to make sure that they're always in that emergent strata. So crown lifting them by snipping all those off, and then removing any forking branches as well. So they're just one straight tree would be important. And then as they reach a higher height around 3 meters upwards, you might start wanting to look at pollarding them and doing your first cuts that way. But for now, I would say just do a light pruning, crown lifting the bottom, and any side branches and forks I would take off.
Okay.
Cool. And Heather, so question, I have 5 rows of bananas and eucalyptus with odd other things interspersed. It doesn't have enough biomass. What can I add in to get it going? Slow progress this year. Thanks. So you've got eucalyptus and bananas, 5 rows with a few of other things. I mean, that's actually a pretty dream team just there. There's a lot of centripetal systems that just have grass, bananas, and eucalyptus. So already you're good as long as you've got a good solid understory layer of grasses. So maybe just for now, because you're saying you don't have enough biomass, so either the density is not.
No, you're totally right, Frida. I'm just saying, but there's no grass possibly in there, and that might be the thing that is the missing one.
Yeah, so getting your cocksfoot established would be really good because that can handle whatever shade you've already got. I don't know how old it is, how mature it is, but if it is quite mature and you're wanting to increase the lower strata, then cocksfoot will still survive in the shade. If it's quite young still and there's a lot of light on the ground, then you can come in with more like your sugar cane and your bana grass or your sorghum, those grasses, those biomass. And then also if you don't have any frost, then your tittonia interspersed, and that would also be good, just to fill in those gaps.
Yeah. I mean, that is a sort of a reoccurring theme, and sometimes people try to overlook that and say, nah, it's good. I'm doing what they do in permaculture. I got the eucalypts, I got the bananas sorted, and here's some grass. It should work. Why is it not working? And it is really always good to ask, is that the biomass that we need, or are we conning ourselves here? And
sorry, I just saw your comment at the bottom saying it was 1 year old.
Oh, 1 year old. Okay. So that is good, because you see, if you notice that a few years down the line, you might be in the same situation, then you would have to reset things. And that is really painful, but often the best thing to do. Now, if it's only 1 year old, that means you still have options to put a lot of stuff in if it's not enough. And so first of all, what's the grass situation? Do you have the right grass? You know, you might find someone is, I don't know where you are. Is it Australia? No?
Well, see, here we go up top. Not sure.
Right.
Oh no, from
Whangarei-Paul Valley.
Anyway,
Sounds New Zealand. Yeah. All right. So, do you have the right grass? What grass is it? If it's Kikuyu, then it might not be the best choice. I mean, bananas are the ones that can cope with Kikuyu more than trees, but it might not be the best choice for highest biomass production. So it might be that elephant grass would do a better job, or it could be what Frida said, cockswood could do a better job. Later on, when it's more shady, more dense, then it could be that Job's tear is doing the best job as a grass. So getting the right grass for your place is important. So you might want to run different blocks with different experiments to see which is actually the one. And then don't look for recipes, because there might be some plant that is actually already in your environment that you have overlooked, that does exceptionally well in your environment, that is not on the red list of a weed, that can fill some of the gaps to make the whole thing more productive. So it is interesting to look for those. And one plant, for instance, that we have overlooked for a long time, even so we had it from the beginning, is a Senna septembrissima or something like that. It's the Brazilian buttercup shrub. even so it's disappointing as it's not a nitrogen fixer despite being from the legume family, it still in certain environments performs so beautifully that you could say, forget about the nitrogen. It is a great gap filler that takes heavy pruning and does a fantastic job. Yeah. Or it could be FAO, the native FAO. In some places, it is just the best plant around. So keep your eyes open. And when you have the feeling that you find something that works really well or is already there and you can just do more of that, then be systematic and really go for it. Between every banana, put one of those. Yeah. And then you suddenly feel that with filling that gap, suddenly there's this extra biomass that you were looking for.
I think that's a good point with being systematic and creating a sort of pattern out of it, because the last thing you want to do is sort of be like, I want a fowl and I want one buttercup and I want one of this, and then you just alternate them in the two spaced out. And then when it comes to management, they all have their different cycles, they all have their different biomass qualities, the different pruning styles and types. That's when you start coming into not so much of an efficient food forest. And also then you have sort of ways where one area is having a higher biomass turnover versus another one. And so just pick the ones that really will work for your situation out of the options.
Yeah.
And then go hard and really be systematic with it.
Yeah. And we sound a bit contradictory now. On one side we say experiment, on the other side be systematic, but you can actually do both somehow. Once you get a feeling, a bit of an observation that that's the one that wants to do it here, then you go systematic on it, and don't wait too long on it. You can see that pretty quick if something wants to be there.
And if you've got 5 rows, you could maybe play one role. One row is mainly in this and one row is mainly in that, and then something like that.
But I mean, at the same time, we don't experiment with just everything in the catalog. If you think of some plants and look them up, what do they want? Often you find information in landscaping catalogs or from us, of course, and sometimes horticulture guides and whatever. You look for, does it like free draining soil? And if you have heavy clay, then maybe don't put too many eggs in that basket. So you already look for the right candidates, but usually you can find that already by just looking through your neighborhood. Look what wants to do at roadsides. Look at the soil that is just one tick worse than what you have on your farm or lifestyle blog. So when you leave your lifestyle blog and it's not as bad as what I see down on the roadside here, because it's more abuse. It had more herbicide. It had more whatever. Just more abuse. The soil is a wee bit more compacted, a wee bit more neglected, and a wee bit less fertilized and whatnot. And look what does well there. And if you take those from this a bit more neglected, a bit worse side, and put them into a similar soil onto your block and has already a wee bit better conditions, then these guys are going to thrive, right? But if you're thinking of a plant that wouldn't even want to grow at all on the roadside, it might not want to do well on your side. It might survive, but that's not what you're after. For plants that are not crops that you want as these gap fillers, you don't want plants that survive. You want plants that thrive like mad. Otherwise, they're useless. Right? There's a difference. With crops, we can make exceptions, but even there, we want some that really want to be there. But we can give them a bit more coaching. But with the gap fillers, the helper plants, whatever you want to call them, you want the ones that just want to burst out of the soil and drive everything else along. Otherwise, they're useless. Yeah. And yes, you can experiment. And when you realize they're not going crazy, then cut them out and leave the ones that are really wanting to be there. It's actually as stark, as simple as that.
And Jane, you're asking, how do olives fit into a food forest? Wow, I think maybe he's not good to answer this one because the olive trees that you've always tried to put in your food forest die.
No.
Or maybe you are good because you can learn from your mistakes. Basically, they're very they are arid plants, Mediterranean plants, and so they do require a lot of ventilation and sun. So they don't like to be too claustrophobic and smothered with other trees. So it'd be sort of a similar situation to stone fruit or apples and pears and whatnot in a temperate design where you're wanting that breathing space in the strata that they're at, wanting that either that sun or the wind or just the ventilation. So yeah, with olives it would be the similar thing, but not necessarily a different climate, where they could probably take a light canopy. They don't need it. They can be easily full sun, but could probably take a light emergent layer. But they really don't like a density around the same strata that they're at. So it would be spacing the olives out, making sure that you have the right varieties for pollination as well is a good one. And then your density would come below them. So that's where you would really hit home your herb forbs, your grasses, like the cocksfoot and whatnot. Any producing crops like maybe Mayoga ginger or yacon, artichokes, globe artichokes, all those sort of lower height plants that can thrive underneath the olives. But yeah, just making sure you've got that mid layer exposed. Otherwise, they'll sort of stagnate and sort of start drooping and not really thriving, and the fruit will just go a bit moldy as well and whatnot. So great along driveways, because then you're actually making use of the access way as well to have a sheet laid out to rake the olives down, or to have a ladder propped out to be able to pick, or have your car parked there to stand on top of it, or whatever it might be. Driveways are always a good fit because they're usually a little bit more rocky as well. They like free draining. Well, actually, do they like free draining? No, they can handle clay.
Well,
just not waterlogging. But
can I defend my olive trees?
Maybe.
Yeah. So the thing with olives is they can handle fairly bad conditions and dryness. So when they're sitting on clay, they look at clay as being a rock, but they don't like to be waterlogged. So don't have them in gullies. Yeah, I see olive trees dying around neighbors because they put them in gullies. Now, why? Admittedly, most of the olives that I planted are sort of in a really bad shape. They haven't died, but they haven't moved beyond the meter since I planted them 15 years ago. And the reason for that is the area I planted them had some older trees around already that we inherited and I didn't take down. So there were some eucalypts around it and some Tasmanian blackwoods, fairly open, but now we introduced the olives into an senescent system and hadn't got around to cut all the trees out, and then planted also other things that were happy with that situation, and that crowded in on the olive trees. And then what happened, and remember I talked about it a while ago, you can tell if a plant doesn't get the sunlight that it needs when it starts picking up insect pests, because it's a plant that gets less sunlight than it needs. So okay, a plant that can be in a lower strata can still put these defenses out even with less sunlight. But if a medium high emergent type plant, which the olive is, emergent or high at least, they don't get enough sun if they are somewhere mid or low. That means they cannot produce these byproducts from the sunlight, such as polyphenols and resins and all of those sort of things, or the sap in general, to flush bora out. And it was the bora, the purines, that constantly sets them back. So they're not dying, but they're kept like a bonsai because they constantly get ringbarked by purines, and then that branch, the new growth, is dying back. So they're constantly standing still because they don't have enough defense to keep these guys out. So that's a sign that we have to read. But for the time being, I was more interested in everything else because Frida's talking out of hundreds of hours of experience of olive harvesting, which we actually do down in the bay where people don't know what to do with their olives. And therefore, it was the lower priority. And over the years, the bananas and cherimoyas have been more important to us. That's why they got a bit neglected. So that's just my defense here. One thing to point out, so is even so, olives have been used traditionally in a what we call a silvopastoral system, where you have a fruit tree or a timber tree with animals grazing below, as they do in the Mediterranean with olives, since beyond biblical times. When we do that here in Northland, the canopy of the olives is not dense enough on its own, which means there's enough sunlight coming in that your sward underneath, your ground layer, is kikuyu. Now, kikuyu, apart from all sort of mean chemical tricks that it has, it can sequester boron from other plants. It's one of its dominator tricks that it has. And olive particularly, just like avocado and some few other crops, are very dependent on boron. And so that means the olive is very sensitive to be growing in kikuyu. So if you don't take the sunlight out with something to get rid of kikuyu, or you never had kikuyu in the first place, then any other grass is okay. Coxwood, whatever. Clovers would be great, alfalfa, fantastic. But kikuyu, if you have too much sunlight and you have kikuyu, that is a bad mix. That doesn't work, even if you graze it. Your trees will be always sickly with that. And so you need to have some dense forbs growing underneath that still make it possible to harvest. So say, for instance, artichoke could be an interesting one, because they sort of die back late summer. Maybe you just get the harvest in and then the artichokes take up again. Or you have something that you don't care mowing down as you harvest the olives, just to make that possible, if it's a commercial thing. But yeah, just say no to kikuyu. And then you can, of course, mix your olive orchard up with having citrus in between, or something a bit more dense as a canopy that can stay below the olives. Yeah, so you can olive, citrus, and some emergent deciduous I would choose, because the olive is evergreen. So I would choose a poplar like a Lombardini, because it's dry usually. Or raisin tree or something, but I think a Lombardini poplar is the classic one that one would use with the olive, like post-Mediterranean. Yeah, and then with olive, the management, ideally, as they would do in Italy, is every 3 years you stack on the tree. So you bring it all down, cut everything productive, everything with a leaf on, you cut off, leave a skeleton of a tree, and you do that in a third of the orchard. So you always have 2/3 in production and 1/3 in recovery. That way you make harvesting easy and the tree stays healthy. And that's how some of those trees of olives in the Mediterranean made it to 600 or more years, because of the pruning, not despite of the pruning. You keep a tree healthy like that.
Richard, you're asking, we've watched your videos on banana management, but still struggle with thinning out. We've got a few healthy clumps with more than 15 plants, range of age up to 12 months in each clump. Well, us too.
Tempting.
Yeah, a lot of, I mean, ideally, the way I spoke to in the video about managing them is ideally what you want to do, but we also have clumps with not quite 15, although maybe up there I do. And especially in the younger years, it's hard because they're just so vibrant and healthy, and it's just like, you don't want to thin them out. So the main importance with management is just thinning out the water shoots, basically. So even if you do have more in a clump, but they're all nice, sword-leaved, true pups, then yeah, there's no real harm, especially if they've got other biomass around them that you can constantly sort of chop and drop for them, or bringing lawn clippings or seaweed, all those things help them be able to support more trunks. But the main thing would be thinning out all the water shoots, so all the ones that already look like little miniature sort of adult bananas in miniature. And they're quite, wobbly and not really strong, and they're still going to grow. They might produce, but they'll be really weak little bunch, and it'll take away from the vitality of the rest of them. So that would be the main thing to thin out. But in terms of trying to really restrict it to the three clumps, that's ideally what you're wanting to do on a commercial scale when you're really trying to prolong the vitality of that clump and not overdraw from it in the same generation. That would be my main advice is just focusing on the water shoots.
The thing is, if you gave them good condition, good planting hole and everything, they might all look perfect. You see, that's the thing. That's what happened here. Initially, they all look perfect, and then if you thin them out, like you have 15 or so, and you look at them, you want to thin them out, and then you go like, I could put them on Trade Me and get $15 or $20 for each, and then you wait for the order to come, and it might not happen, and then they get bigger, and in the end you forget about it. That's what happened to us a lot here. We waited for orders, and sometimes it will come. Suddenly someone wants 200 pups or so, and then you can't service because you just culled them all out. But initially you think, nah, that's just a cliche. I can get away with 15, not a problem. And actually you can, probably for 2 or 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And each one produces a nice bunch, and you think, see, I'm just better than what they thought. And but then suddenly there's a point when you overstep it, suddenly is too much, and then reducing it somehow is incredibly messy, and you overstep the line, and there's no easy way back now. The only easy way back now appears to be to cut everything down and then let only the nicest suckers stay afterwards, and that is really cruel to your clump, and it sets you back a lot. So you practically lose what you thought you gained beforehand. So advice is, find someone to sell extra pups to if they all look perfect.
Or expand to your own.
Or expand on your own place. You can never have too many bananas. I could tell you for hours what you can do with them if you can't eat them all. Or
which we should do actually.
Which we will do. And the other thing is that if you leave too many plants at once growing outwards, you reach too quickly an outer ring of a high density, and the ones that are on the inside growing back inwards, they become really sickly. Whereas if the ring expands very slowly because you cull them out enough, and then they start almost getting to the next ring to them, then by that time the center has been recovered, because bananas don't like to grow on their own dead center for a long time. But if it takes long enough, then you can let them grow back into the center and then out again. So you can suddenly extend it to decades rather than 1 decade, the whole banana wave that you get, because they have a biological clock that depends on how well they feel about the place. And but then it really depends also on how you planted them in the first place. For instance, I heard about a guy a bit south of Whangarei who took a paddock of Kikuyu and planted clumps of bananas quite far away from each other and let them develop into really dense clumps of dozens of plants, and does circles around it with a ride-on mower, blowing the grass sort of constantly into around those bananas. So they have a lot of space on the outside for sun coming in. They have a lot of time to expand, and they get a lot of mulch thrown at them. The Kikuyu amongst them being like a sort of, I guess, like a golf course almost, and like a park with banana clumps in there. And that seemed to work pretty good. So it depends on the setting, how far you planted them apart initially and what else you have planted in between. Yeah, bananas are fairly self-gregarious. They can handle their own company pretty well. So if you really want to bank on bananas, then you can have your whole system denser with bananas, but then they will hit each other faster. So therefore, you have to do better management. Whereas if they're further spaced apart, you can let those clumps be a bit denser. So it depends all on that context, really. But in hindsight, I would say we haven't thinned out ours enough, and we are paying the price for it now that they are a bit sort of weak within the system, that they cannot keep up with the density of the rest of the system. Would say yes, but we want the bananas, we cut everything else back big time. But the thing is, we make more money on chirimoyas than on bananas. So we actually do want the balance to go towards the chirimoya that are now shaping up.
And you want that natural progression anyway. You don't want to always have one thing in the system.
And ideally, you would have a new place where you break in with bananas.
Cool. So I hope that answers. I just thought you had another question
confused.
there. You asked, how do you know what to take and how much to thin out kind of feels wrong. So I hope that answered that as well. I didn't see that sub question.
And then, yes, you probably saw that on the video, how to stab them. And because the last thing you want is cutting a plant back and have it coming up again, exhausting the whole plant.
Yeah, so you really want to make sure you cross into that meristem. Which is actually quite. I got a message on Instagram once from someone asking, what are alternative ways of killing banana pups? Because all I've been hearing is either putting petrol in the center, or what was the other one, or using chemicals. And I was like, what? It's easy. Just literally a spade or a machete, cross into the meristem. So
I had someone saying you use an acute drilling. All of those. I don't know. For us, it's not a problem whatsoever. Just with a machete, it's pretty straightforward.
And Daniel and Nicole, any advice on establishing a larger plot using syntropic principles? Mulching riding mowers instead of sickle, dense syntropic hedgerows with no till, rotational cultivation in the larger alleys.
Well, if it's really large and labor is your issue, then you might even have those rows so far apart that in between you could consider grazing, right? And then we might talk about silvopasture, but with syntropy tree rows, breaking that up, that would be the novelty.
Yeah, rather than silvopasture, which is trees sort of dotted in a paddock. It's actually lines of syntropy that are sort of either fenced off or planted in a way that it can allow for light grazing, fast rotation.
Like, I mean, if you're not familiar with silvopasture, so it's a mix of tree crops and animal grazing, browsing, or collecting food, like pigs collecting food or so. They're not grazing as such normally, unless they're kunis. And normally the emphasis is on the animals in that case, usually, and the others are sort of a surplus. But if you would do a syntropic a system of silvopasture, then one could say, well, actually the hedgerows are the important part, but the animals do the management on the grasses in between. So it would be a bit more of a novelty thing. But so that would be for the extreme large property. I think that could make the most sense, at least in New Zealand. And if you go scaling down from that extreme, yes, of course, you want to motorize everything, but in order to make your work environment more enjoyable, I would definitely recommend try everything with electric. It is the big revolution in agriculture. I think now is going to happen with small electric tools that small farmers all over the world are going to take up. Like so. And so you can think of electric hedge trimmers, for instance. You could have an electric hedge trimmer mounted on a electric tricycle, like we have. We haven't done that yet, but you could do that. You could use weed eaters, but weed eaters are a bit more dangerous for your trees. A hedge trimmer is much more easy to guide than a weed eater. And then ride on mowers that throw the grass to one side, as they do, of course, yes. And but again, ideally there would be electric, because it takes a lot of fuel to cut grass. It would be sad doing that all with fossil energy, but that's our take on that. And then there are quite a few syntropic projects in Brazil where they do large scale and they convert grain harvesters, two-wheel tractors that deposit the grass. They cut it with a sickle bar and deposit the grass onto the tree rows quite nicely. So there are machines for that. If you want to do it on a commercial thing, you might want to look into that, what machines have already been developed for that. And you will find that on films that are produced by Life in Syntropy or Agenda Götz.
Yeah, Agenda Götz is a good link for that too.
But then, of course, yeah, clear rows stick to a keyline system. Ideally, don't do contour. That makes mechanization difficult because the lines are not equal distance. Where if you do a keyline, it is almost contour, but almost contour, but with an advantage of water harvesting in a certain direction, and your lines will be parallel. So there's a win-win situation right there. And then you can use any machinery, and those distances you would adjust to whatever machinery, haymaking equipment, or whatever you want to use in those rows to move the grass around. That will dictate the distance of your tree rows. So you have to keep that in mind before you get planting on it.
Cool. Any last things on that?
No, that's yeah.
Cool. So then our next question is from the Vigilant Yacht characters.
Charters.
Charters. Characters. Probably very interesting characters. What's the likelihood of direct seedling avocados? Sorry. What's the likelihood of direct seedling avocados will give a edible fruit? I heard it's not likely at all. They're not true to seed, but like the Hass avocado came about from planting loads of seeds and then that one being a Hass, and then you graft onto that, graft from that, and then you just have purely Hass avocado. So there is a 1 in a something or other likelihood that you'll it'll come up with something edible and interesting and maybe completely unique. But yeah, it's totally unlikely that it won't be like it's a mother plant. The few seed avocados that we've planted or you've planted along here, a lot of them are actually quite nice, aren't they?
Some are nice, but it's nothing that you would sell.
No, soft
you
skin.
you couldn't sell it. They're unpredictable for most people, but for us they're nice. So if it's for your own consumption, you will get some nice surprises actually. And of course they're hardier trees than grafted trees, no doubt about that. So you get away with not the perfect site by having direct seeded trees rather than using grafted trees. There's a difference.
But a good blend you can do is though, because the benefit, like you're saying, of direct seeding is that you have the right root structure then, because you're direct seeding it. It's growing from a seed in place, so that taproot's going to be very undisturbed, and so you're going to have much less problems down the line with like Phytophthora or something like that. So direct seeding is really great, and then you can just plant 5 at a time in a spot, and then see which does best, or graft them all with what you would rather have on there, and then see which one takes better to the graft, and then cull the other ones out basically. And then you've got that nice one in situ that has a really good root structure and is grafted with the avocado that you want.
Mind you, grafting avocado is a bit trickier than what you have seen us doing with the pears down in the Syntropy rows. That was easy peasy. That a beginner can do that. Avocados takes a bit more knowledge of grafting and a bit more preparation, because it's an evergreen. So you have to find the right match of sign wood and rootstock. So they're both in the right phase to do that. But in general, it's not a problem. And your food forest will provide a good environment for grafting. Yeah, it is wind protected, it's sun protected. So there's no reason why it should be in any way not as good as doing that in a nursery situation. But you will have to learn up on that. And or maybe if you want to do it in a bigger scale, get someone to do it for the day for you, and that's done, sort of thing. But it's certainly better to graft in situ. As Frida said, the plant will be healthier than actually transplanting. Even if you plant it from a PB10, there's a lot of transplanting shock and the root being curled up a bit and so on. If it's a helper plant, who cares? But if it's a crop that you want in there for 40 years, 50 years or so, then you want the best root picture possible.
Cool. And then Aaron, you're saying thinking of bamboo for some shelter. Do you have a recommended variety? I don't know my bamboo that well.
Well, for shelter, if it's a windbreak, then you don't want a runner. And the most commonly used is the Olhamii, Bambusa olhamii. It's a good fodder bamboo. We use it mainly as a fodder and for propping up this and that. It's not a building thing. I mean, most bamboos are actually quite tricky to build with. They get bored up pretty easy, and so
in this climate.
In this climate, yeah. So I wouldn't have too many illusions on that. If you want a good building timber, then it's the Moso bamboo, the runner, which is a bit problematic, possibly. But that would be if you want to use it for anything else but shelter. Yeah, otherwise the Olhamii, I'd say there's a reason why people always use that. And as we prune it back every year, we keep it at 3-4 meters maximum, as it does in one season. The tallest grows in one season is up to 4 meters, and then we cut it back down again and feed it pretty everything through the goats through winter.
Thanks for your comment, Jill. Also know that helped with your eucalyptuses. And Jess, you're asking, is it feasible to form a syntropic food forest around 6 meter tall Kānuka forest, leaving the Kānuka as the emergence? Sadly, no. Yeah, if you're going to include Kānuka into your food forest for pollination for bees or whatever, then ideally you want that growing up with your food forest. But yeah, Kānuka, Manuka, they're early succession phase accumulative trees, and they are quite tannin rich, and they don't take well to pruning. So yeah, all those things make them a little bit difficult in a food forest. They are really pioneering and setting up the soil, accumulating and breaking up that soil for then creating that nursery for then the other natives or typically the other natives to come through and overtake them. So that's the natural cycle.
Sorry, Frida, I wonder if you understood that it is already there and it's 6 meters.
I know that's something, but I'm just saying that's the only way. Like that's their function. So I'm just going around to. So if you've already got 6 meter tall Kānuka existing, that's them already having lived out a certain phase in their life cycle, and you're ideally wanting to remove that to then create that space to then come with the next phase in succession. So you'd be blending succession phases in a not positive way. Like when you're planting eucalyptuses in a food forest, you're blending succession phases because eucalyptus do belong to that accumulation transitionary phase, but there are at least plants that you can prune quite heavily and they can still contribute to propelling that food forest along. But Kānuka that belongs to a early succession phase is a very slow developer of the soil, and it's doing a certain function in that phase of the evolution of the soil, but it doesn't have that same propelling mechanism that you can with eucalypts and things like that, because you can't do a heavy pruning. So you're very limited in how much you can actually rejuvenate that area, and they can often give off quite a strong senescence hormone, which can affect then your food forest that you're trying to establish in that already 6 meter tall Kānuka. So you'd be there'd be big trade-offs to trying to struggle against that natural succession. You'd be trying to do something that wasn't quite in line with the drive of nature in that space.
Well, I mean, you have done it up at your place.
No,
Well, you opened it up, but you left quite a few in there. The canopus up on your side.
Only for shade and wind protection, but not as a part of the food forest.
Yeah, but it is still part of it. But there's this trade-off because it's a landscape item and it looked quite pretty in the first years, but there's this trade-off, it slows everything else down. It is sort of, you notice that it is not a good idea because that's already making seeds and everything. It's in essence, you can't get up there and cut the flowering branches off or anything like that. And there's a conflict in nature. It happens and it doesn't matter. Nature can be slow, who cares, there's no judgment. But if you really want a bursting food forest, then that is something that slows you down, definitely.
So yeah, you'd be much better off removing them, leaving maybe a few, like, you know, I did, just as a, you know, just have something a bit more visually higher, and also just a bit of shade and wind protection, maybe leaving a few, but for the most part taking them down, using them as, you know, terrace pegs and walls or whatnot. You wouldn't want to bury them in like hugelkultur with Kanako, by the way. If you do that, they just stay solid on the ground, so you'll have too much drainage. Or another topic. But yeah, basically firewood, sell firewood, and then if you still want the Kanako for whatever, for like honey or what it is, then actually, you know, the ones that self-seed themselves from then on, maybe you can let them grow up with the food forest, and then you can prune them out once they get senescence as well. If you're particularly wanting them for flower, because even at a quite young age, they can be quite lush and bushy and produce quite a lot of flowers, and maybe you can just see them as sort of the next wave in that sense. But yeah, working with any mature tree 6 meters tall from accumulation transitionary phases is always a struggle, whether it's Kanako or something else. You always want to really reset things and come up fresh. Hope that helped. And Susie got a south-facing windbreak to create on clay that will be shaded by trees that are dense to the ground to the north. Eventually, I will remove the existing tall tree row. When the newly planted area is dense and tall, eventually I will remove the existing tall tree row when the newly planted area is dense and tall. Are there any food trees that will cope with the southerly and shade? We are near Muriwai, and the spot should be frost-free. Thanks.
Okay, tough. But did I mention the green palm last Q&A? I think I did. Yeah, I talked. No, there was Liz.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. At the moment, I'm in this sort of addictive phase of eating green palm fruit. I just love them, one of my favorite fruit. I know not many people share that passion, but it could also be used to feed goats and pigs and so on. But incredibly productive plant, and it doesn't mind salt, winds. Palms, of course, are designed to handle a lot of wind, and they could start establishing in the shade of your existing trees until they're well anchored. They're going to handle a bit of shade, and then you can open them up, and there they are, voila. And they can take, once established, they can take drought, they can take waterlogging, and especially salty winds, coastal situations, they don't mind at all. They can handle a bit of frost. So the only thing is they're not a tree. But that comes to mind. I think we are not considering palms enough as a companion in our systems, because there are not many palms that produce anything useful for us. But I think the queen palm is actually, it is a miniature coconut with an edible hull, hence the name, the botanical name they used to have, which is Cocos datil, which means the date coconut, and that's exactly what they are. Have a look at it and get excited about it, hopefully. And that could be something that comes to mind for that. Otherwise, olives, but they would need sun pretty much from word go. Otherwise, you end up with the ones that we just described.
What about chestnuts and stuff? Would they use some?
Yeah, chestnut could be, but if it's meant to be a windbreak, you probably want to stick with evergreens ideally.
What about the banyan nut? Monkey puzzles. Plant nuts.
I'm not sure how they are with salt, so it might be
salt.
okay. Banksia is good for coastal and salty winds. It's an evergreen. It's a good windbreak. They would be able to handle shade for a while. However, they're meant to be forbidden in some areas now.
And
some
fruit trees, I think. Trees.
Oh yeah, sorry, new one for okay. It doesn't take that box there. And clay.
Shady clay, salt, shady, southerly. Oof, there's some good conditions in there. Yeah, palms really main thing. Purakawa maybe.
Yeah,
fruit.
And then bamboos. We have here, not far away, we have in the dunes and also on clay areas, in dry and in wet areas, we have heaps of Japanese arrow bamboo, which grows to about 4 meters tall. It can handle the salt by the looks of it. So, but then of course it's not a fruit tree. But if you want to replace the shelter with something else, yeah.
Or what about things that she could then grow mushrooms from? So like purakawa or maybe the oaks or Banksia then for that reason. Then maybe Banksia is a great tree to grow there, but the food would be through pruning back the branches and inoculating mushrooms.
Something might still come to mind if we put it in the notes, but if for the moment I think a queen palm could be good, of course, mixed with something else to go with it, because they don't give you the protection below. So you need something, because the queen palm will be emergent and grows fairly fast. You need still something to put underneath.
And stuff like that.
Or as a native, which is good coastal and rough and windy and everything, is Nayo, which is very nice to prune, but it's poisonous, so that doesn't work for your stock. So or you have olives and queen palm, for instance. You could do that.
But yeah, if we think of any more plants not on the spot, we'll include that into the notes. Cool. And then Kamaniki, we've acquired some babako and pawpaw trees. Would they work in our banana plantings? Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. All quite heavy feeders as well. Nice fleshy leaves. For sure.
There is another plant that actually deserves a bit more attention in that group. In the I think it's Caricacia, the family. Is it papaya? Anyway, it's the oak leaf papaya. It grows fairly tall, but you can prune it nicely, and it's deciduous, and it works really well throughout our food forest, and it makes tiny little papayas like so, and you eat the whole thing. So it's a good source of the enzyme that breaks down proteins, the papain. It's not terribly sweet, but it's it's a fruit that you eat in just one bite, seeds and all, and it is healthy because of the enzymes, of course. And
but yeah, otherwise they'd be good. They're all of them are quite sensitive to waterlogging, so that would be the main thing. But so are your bananas.
That's
so
true. But you're on volcanic,
good.
so
Cool. And Susie just confirmed, Banksia thrive here, so they will be a part of it, and not so much salt drift. So that's cool. So we can consider that with some more plants. Awesome. And thanks for all the feedback coming through there. Thank you, guys. We've just got one question that someone submitted that couldn't attend, so we'll just answer that and then wrap up for the evening. So it's from Gonzalo from Portugal. Last minute desperate question. I've been laboriously sowing sorghum Sudan. Today, while walking the rows, I've just noticed something have been eating the seeds. but not even randomly, like all of them. Whatever it is, it must have been able to smell them. The seeds are perfectly shelled. What could I do? Is there maybe something I could dip the seeds into before sowing, or are transplants my only option?
So for us here in New Zealand, Australia, we only get treated sorghum Sudan grass, and we don't have the problem. We wanted the untreated. So Gonzalo, you seem to have been able to source an untreated seed, so it's good and bad by the sounds of it. Now the thing with Sudan grass, I don't know how big the area you're planting, but it is a perennial. If it's frost free or only light frost, it's a perennial. It is for us, even so where we have it, it gets light frosts. And in winter, it looks like it's on its way out. And then suddenly comes spring, poof, it is there again. And now we have had it for 3 years now. And it's really amazing for us. So that makes it worthwhile to actually put it into seed trays, into plug trays. So it can be quite small plug because it's a grass, it doesn't make a taproot. You can abuse it by transplanting and so on. So maybe that's what you have to do. In your case, it's a little bit early actually for planting sorghum Sudan in Portugal now. It's March. That would be surprisingly early for a tropical grass. So maybe you were a bit early anyway. So I would recommend, if that's a problem, it seems to be birds, probably sparrows, that go for it.
Rabbits, maybe?
Nah, there would be a bird. Must be a bird. I can't imagine.
Well,
maybe a mouse.
systematically,
Maybe a
then it's
mouse. But
Oh, it's seeds, not the actual
yeah.
shells. So, yeah.
So I would either grow in trays. And the other thing, just for everybody's knowledge, what I noticed is that just like with Job's tears, even so they are sold to us or understood usually as being an annual, we find both Job's tear and sorghum Sudan being such perennials that we can even go and take the clumps apart and break them up like we do with vetiver grass or elephant grass and plant these shoots with roots into the new places. They establish, of course, a lot faster than doing that with either seeds or with small seedlings. And I have a feeling it does reset their biological clock, that it extends their life because we have broken them up. So they seem to be inclined enough to be a perennial that by breaking up the clump, you renew their biological clock and you can spin them along for good. But we don't have too much experience on that yet, but that's what it looks like. That as the clumps start to decay, they don't look that great anymore. They go into senescence. So you look at them in summer and they go a bit, and you say, okay, we got 3 years now. It looks to be going downhill now. But then you take it apart, you plant bits, and suddenly they come to life again. So that is another option, just as we do with cocksfoot. Yeah, cocksfoot the same. You could direct seed and you lose to birds. You could put into seed trays, can be an open tray like for lettuce or so, and then transplant them or put them in cell trays, transplant them. That's the second way. And the third way is you go somewhere where you have a clump, either your bed borders already or in the wild, break the clump apart, plant that, and you renew the plant doing that, and it gives you another so many years. So these are the 3 ways, and you have to pick the one that is more in accordance with your time availability, the size of your property, or the pressure that you have from animals that have different plants. So out of those, you have to figure out what's the best for you. So good luck with that. And but it's important to get that sorted, whatever the situation is for your place, because grasses are super important in our system. We have overlooked them too long in permaculture. Oh, that's it. Okay, cool. So I hope that helped you a bit on your way again. And it's great to hear from all your comments how you are actually eagerly putting that all into practice, and that's so great. That's fantastic. And how that feeds back into the group, and we can all together work on that and further experiment. And I think we're doing really important research, all of us right now, and it's just invaluable for the planet what we're doing, to be honest. We have to recognize that. And it's an unpaid research we're doing, all of us here. And it's great that we can share that, and each of us work in their own situation and learn more about it and feed it back. That's fantastic. So keep up your spirits, even so sometimes it doesn't work out as you were hoping, or it takes more time or more elbow grease than you expected. It's a big learning curve. We are entering new territory here. We are not rewarming things up that have been done in the past. We are having new territory with new tools, new plants, new techniques, new understanding, new models of succession. All of those things that we are working on at the moment. It's new land. It's a new path that we're taking, and it will take energy to figure things out. So take courage and don't lose your enthusiasm, and be sure there will be food coming your way. And there was a question of Gonzalo. Sorry, Gonzalo, we can't address it this time. He says, okay, the food forest, but what if you have so much food you want to eat something else? What else does the food forest provide food-wise? We could fill a whole session. Maybe we do a whole video on that. Sorry, we couldn't cover it today. But it's something that we are very passionate about, to find all sort of ways of fulfilling all your needs from a syntropic system, however that might look like. And there's more than fruit in it, that's for sure. And there's a healthy diet in it, that's for sure too. And I'm sure we can feed the world with syntropic food systems better than we do now.
Well said. Yeah. No. Yeah. Thanks again for showing up, and all the early birds that came here, and yeah, just really appreciate all the questions, and we enjoy it every month. Like Klaus said, it's just a great community research project going on as well. So it's really awesome having all your feedback as to what's going on and different questions you're asking, sort of giving an indication of what are things you're planting, what are the problems you're coming across. So yeah, lots of learning happening both ways. So thank you for that. And yeah, see you all next month. Awesome.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.